Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session Recording 209. My name is Danny Beaumont, and I am a Principal Product Manager on the Adobe Muse team. And this is a jam session. So jam sessions are an opportunity for me to talk about the Muse application, how I use the application, also to get a sense from the community, what's going on with you with Muse. So ever since we put it on Facebook Live, it's been actually a great way to get a lot of folks seeing what's going on with the tool and with my presentation. What I would suggest is if you are watching on Facebook Live and you have questions for me, it's a bit of a juggle, but I will come on into the comment section of the Facebook Live post and look there for any questions as we work. So it takes me a minute to get this up and running a little bit here. But I'm going to just refresh here 1 second. All right, I will swing through in just a little bit as that does start to show up. Okay, I was sort of rolling through the older jam sessions with Adobe Muse and looking at some of the older topics that I haven't covered in a while to see what seemed to be the most popular. So what had the most questions that were asked, and also the views. And to be honest, I think probably one of the most watched sessions I saw was one where I talk about a combination of using fluid breakpoints and fixed breakpoints and a feature that Muse has that allows you to apply scroll effects to a site. That was probably watched 25,000 times, which I thought was pretty good. So I thought it was a good time to refresh the topic. I also had a slight epiphany. I am in the middle of redesigning a site, and it's something that we're going to unveil at the Adobe Muse Max conference in a few weeks. I think we're about 2 weeks out. So next jam session will be a skip because I will be at Adobe Max. But the sample that I'm working on, it's not at all done, but I think it's a terrific work in progress that allows me to kind of show off some of the ways that I'm making decisions about interactivity with websites. So let me actually do a few things here. I'm going to make that little bar up there a little quieter. And I want to also look for something I put on my desktop earlier today. It's a shortcut. So I have a motorcycle. I love my motorcycle. It overwhelmed me at first, but I think I can now handle it on the streets of San Francisco. It's a Triumph motorcycle. And today I got an email from Triumph talking about, I couldn't even tell you, they have, I guess you can go tour their factory. But I thought this was an interesting website because it really is not built with Adobe Muse, from what I can tell. I didn't look, but I'm just going to assume so. But the site is very close to what it is that I'm trying to create using Adobe Muse. So if you look at this site, as I think many folks know, Muse, as a Muse designer, you combine two different things together. You have a tool, Adobe Muse. It is a freeform design tool. So it allows you to create the content of your site, create the content of pages without a lot of what we call bumpers in the software world. So things that kind of keep you safe from falling off the road now and again, but bumpers can also get in your way. And when you look at many design tools like Squarespace, let's say, for example, or Wix, they use different web frameworks to keep you within the confines of the web. So the upside is that it's pretty safe. You don't really create sites that won't render in the browser or don't function probably the way you had in mind. The downside is that you're really limited in your creativity. So because the web is open and because there are so many people building out websites, it moves very, very fast. The Muse team, the engineering team, and the product managers very early on made two distinct decisions that I think are worth calling out. One is that we gave you a freeform design tool and didn't box you in, so you could continue to evolve as the web evolves without us having to dramatically change the tool. The other is that we make it extensible by way of third-party widgets that allow you to inject content from other sites that are trending or important. So when we look at this site, I would suggest that this is a new trend. We've seen things like parallax effect, where everything is moving at different speeds of scroll and flying in and out. That was probably 3-4 years ago. We've seen this idea of flat design, where content is very simple, very two-dimensional, and it also lends itself to the world of responsive design, such that if I have a very large display, I might have tiles, and the tiles basically will lay themselves on that page. I'm now flashing here, which means I'm going to have to scroll pretty quickly or else that's going to drive me crazy. But on a very large breakpoint on a desktop device, tiles might stack 4 across. As you bring down the width of the browser, those tiles might go from 3 to 2 to 1 tile and stack down the page. This method allows you as a designer to really make sure that the design you're building from the broadest breakpoint to the smallest breakpoint, just knowing that you're in the right world for that. If you look at this new design, this is an example of what I've seen trending, and we'll kind of dissect it as we go along. So what you'll notice is that it is a responsive website. Again, this is not built in Muse. It's just an example I saw today. So as I scroll down on the page, notice that objects are kind of coming into view. Triumph wants my feedback, probably not the time for that. But objects come into view and they're fading into view as I do that. As I continue down on the page, notice that I'm getting this just subtle interactivity. So notice that when I'm off canvas, I don't see things. As I come into view, and these are also very specifically conscious decisions about the design. In this implementation, this image loads once and then stays loaded as I scroll down on the page. Notice that that happened with the next set of images. If I scroll off and come back on, it stays in there. So it's load once and stay. As I continue down, it just continues with that page content. Now, even though this is not a Muse website, it probably is going to fall into some of the same truths about Adobe Muse. If I come in and drag the edge of the browser here, notice that I'm jumping between breakpoints. And this site, not built in Adobe Muse, it kind of has some breakage because it's got a lot of movement going on. Notice that navigation is stacking for a minute there in kind of an odd way. And as I get to a smaller breakpoint, let's say a tablet design, I see that the content is no longer interactive. It's very fixed. The idea of interactivity with touch-enabled devices like tablets and smartphones, it can be a little iffy. Quite often, because you're using a finger to navigate through a page, it may or may not be to your advantage to have a lot of that interactivity happening. Now, with Adobe Muse, let's say you were shooting for a pretty similar concept in your design. Those of you that have hung around Muse for a while know that a few years back, we offered something called parallax scrolling. And the idea behind parallax effects, if I want to go somewhere quickly here, let's go to the very old, the Wild Isles. If I can get this correct. Obviously, I have not been there in a while. So if I click on here, I forget how old this site is, but it showed off all of the scroll effects that Muse allowed you to have. As I mentioned, I think this was about 4 years ago. So Muse allows you in a fixed breakpoint to control at the speed of scroll the visibility, so hide and show content. You can fade objects in and out. You'll notice as I work down the page here, I have things like containers that have a scroll effect applied to it that show visibility of objects. As I come on down, notice that that's continuing to happen. I also have things like signs that are appearing, so they're fading in and then fading back out again. I have objects moving in the opposite direction of the scroll wheel, so notice the little spork spoon set there, spoon fork, is flying inside that backpack. I have things like animations that are playing once I hit a certain trigger point with an object. So these are all scroll effects, but the world got really hard for the Muse team when we introduced fluid breakpoints. What happened is the way that you define a scroll effect in Muse is using something known as a T handle. And if you ask me, looking back on it, it's a very, very technical implementation of scroll effects. If I go to another site, if I just go to scrolleffects.com, this is a terrific way to break down all of the different types of scroll effects that Muse offers. So the fade, the move in a certain direction, things of that sort. So this is just a great playful site. And if you roll over this little triangle, you can download the source file and really reverse engineer how we achieved a lot of these effects. What you'll see kind of illustrated here is we show you how that T handle for an object moves in relationship to the top of the browser. What became challenging for us, that we've not had a chance to actually re-engineer yet, is when you resize the width of a browser, quite often objects are set to be fluid height and width, so they'll reduce in height as the width reduces, let's say a photo. Additionally, if you have text in a container, quite often that container is going to grow larger as the width of your browser gets narrower. And all of that affects the placement of objects within the breakpoint. So we can't use this idea of a T handle to determine at what point when you're scrolling an object does go through and animate. So if you're in Adobe Muse and you have a fixed breakpoint site, so rather than fluid width, it's fixed, you can come in and work with scroll effects as you ordinarily would. You fall short, though, when it comes to fluid breakpoints. So what I would suggest is this is an opportunity for the extensibility of the tool to step up and start to allow you to do some of the things that the native Muse application hasn't had a chance to implement. And I'm speaking specifically about some on-load animations. So literally, there's a third-party provider, Muse Themes, and they have something called on-load animations, I think. Let's see if we can find it real quick. So in fact, I'm going to do myself a favor. If I come into my Muse application, I have built out a site, and I am actually using these widgets. So you'll notice here I've got a landing page area, and I've got the on-loan animator widget placed on the page. And what I'm doing is achieving some of that Triumph website fade in and out, and viewing, basically, so movement and opacity related to objects on fluid breakpoints. And I thought that this could be a nice real-world scenario where I can show you how I've gone in and implemented different tricks using the existing tool to achieve some of those same visual effects that we just saw. So let's go ahead and look at where I am in the site. As I mentioned, it's not done. I'm under the gun for Max, but I'll show you at least how far I've gotten so far. So if I go to, this is actually called The Story of Baya. How's that for fancy? So in theory, the idea here is that it is kind of an indie film, and it's just a film showcase website. And you may or may not be able to see this over my screen sharing tool, but if I reload the page, what happens is there's a sequence to the load there. So first off, the background image loads up. The background is actually a full width video. So I'm using Withy from cookie.com to have a full width video there. The next thing that happens, I'm going to refresh it again. So the video loads. Next up, I've got some SVG text. So the story of Baya is actually rendered in Adobe Illustrator. The reason for that is it allows me to actually resize my text, my headline here. So if I grab the edge of the browser, when I get to a certain breakpoint, this is a fixed breakpoint at 1400 pixels. When I get down to 1200, you'll notice I messed this up just a mere 10 minutes ago, but I jumped to the next breakpoint. The video is continuing to be there. Notice I have to fiddle here. Sorry, guys. That's what happens when you make changes at the last minute. But I have that text, the story of Baya, that is SVG. And because it is SVG, I can place it and set it to resize height and width. From there, I have just some other objects to show that kind of animation. So first, the background video loads, very subtly playing in the background. Second, the story of Baya loads. And then purposefully, third, I have a delay for the quotes so that it gives you just that feeling of interactivity as I'm working. If I move down on the page, you'll notice at the bottom of the design here, I have pinned footer navigation. And it is allowing you to jump between what I would almost call scenes on a page. Now, I think there's merit to talking about this a little bit. I'm always open to making a fool out of myself. I've been asking around with the web, and the spirit of a jam session is you're welcome to try to find me and let me know if I'm wrong. But if I were designing this presentation in PowerPoint, I would have the ability to set something to not only center horizontally, but vertically as well. That's more difficult with the web. And because of that same idea that I talked about, because the width of the browser affects the content in that document, it's a little unusual to find easy ways, non-scary ways to center content on the page. So in that Triumph motorcycle example, as well as this site, there's an idea that I would love to be able to control the height of my browser, but as a visual designer, it's really something that you can't exactly control. People are going to come in and resize their browsers, both height and width. And as your design works, finding ways to make sure that you can center content in a way that is fluid in the way it's scrolling up on the page, I think is important. So I have a designer who's working with me. He's kind of art directing this piece. And I think in his mind, this largest breakpoint would be about 700 pixels high. And what happens here is I have this persistent navigation that allows me to step through the story of Baya. I know we want to see how many times I can say that name. So if I come to the second anchor tag link here that's pinned to the bottom of the browser, when I click and release, it loads into another section. And notice how I get that lazy load to the text. I'll go back up to the top again. And then when I hit that again, it's got the lazy load to the next section for this site design. If I jump to the third section, I've got kind of a carousel video. This is what the art director wanted. So if I roll over here, I can load these images. This is also a cookie fluid gallery widget. If I click the fourth section, this is also kind of a work in progress. I have some additional quotes that are using that same lazy load methodology. If I jump over to, I just kind of want to show you a little bit of this and then we'll dig in. If I jump to a page I was working on today, this one is kind of interesting. The artist, when he designed the site, he gave me a Photoshop comp. And it took me a long time to mentally come up with a way that I could achieve what he's prototyped here. In fact, let's jump over to the contact form, and I'll just kind of show you how I went through my thought process as I was deciding how I would build this out. So I'm going to switch over to Photoshop for a minute, and I just want to explain this scenario because I've been kind of scratching my head a little bit. If you're a visual designer, and you don't code, you don't build websites, I think as a designer, you tend to play things very safe. So if you're going to hire a hand coder to come in and build a site that you're going to sell to your client, I think as a designer, you don't take chances. You play it safe because you're not sure what can and can't be achieved. I kind of like testing that when I get an opportunity. So folks here at Adobe that wanted to build out this asset, they hired a designer. The designer doesn't know Muse at all. He knows what he sees on the web, and he can point and say, hey, see that Triumph website? I wanted to do that. But he's not aware of what Muse can and can't do. And it can end up being painful and time-consuming, but I really kind of enjoy that scenario because it allows me to think outside the box and come up with solutions to what the real world is offering, using Muse as it is today, along with some third-party widgets if necessary. So what I got from the designer, he gave me the landing page, and he kind of spent a good deal of time really talking about how he wanted to structure the site. And you'll notice he had a number of breakpoints. So he has desktop, tablet, probably two orientations of tablet, and then a mobile device, a phone. And as I mentioned, he had this idea of really sections that are about 700 pixels in height. And you'll notice that each section is that same height with footer down below. The next one is about 600 pixels, and somewhat consistently remains, actually not so much. Again, this was just his comp. I had to talk to him about it. And a lot of what was hard for me is trying to intuit what he means, what the behavior is to each of these objects as you go between breakpoints. So I got some pretty good details here and iterated pretty well on the site, but I was kind of left with a lot of questions as I went further here. So there's a trailer page where you can watch this trailer video for this upcoming site, but it's not clear how this changes from desktop to tablet and smartphone. Do you actually play the trailer on the phone was a question I had. For the photo area here, he wanted the photo to have a light box. That was pretty straightforward for me. So these were individual thumbnails that would then go into a full screen light box. I had to guess a little bit what happens on the phone layout. Do we do single column for the thumbnails? And down here, this is the stuff that really got me stuck. So if you look at the contact form, his vision was to have a 700 by 700 square area here that on tablet would just become fluid width, so it would scale. And then kind of interestingly, oddly, when the form started to get much too crowded, we would jump to a top to bottom image that would have the contact form side by side and then stacked. Well, just this page, this is where I've been focusing in the last few days, is really kind of interesting because as you think about Muse, there are limitations that are inherent in the browser. There's limitations that Muse honestly has as well. And you want to try to think about how you solve some of these problems. So I knew that the designer's intent here was to be able to have an image that, again, looking at what he's given me here, it looks like that image is set to scale to fill the browser. And as the width of the browser reduces, it would probably be fluid width and become narrower, right? It looks like it's also gotten a little shorter, but my brain gets a little stuck on that because unless this is a placed photo, being able to scale height and width is impossible from what I can tell. And then there was this crazy jump where in the smaller breakpoint, the image moved to the top with the solid container towards the bottom. So let's just jump in on this for a minute. Let me show you how I solved it because I think it's kind of interesting. What I basically figured out is it's kind of twofold solution. When you go to work with widgets within Muse, Muse includes a composition widget, right? Composition would allow me to come in and have, let's say, multiple triggers with targets. But the problem with a composition widget is that it does not fill the container full screen height and width. Slideshow widgets allow you to have a full screen instance of the slideshow, but it's a slideshow, so it rotates through back and forth. The second truth was that I didn't want this image to be filling the entire screen. I wanted it to fill exactly 50% of the screen. So the approach that I took, interestingly, oddly enough, the other thing that I do want to mention is I went down the path of why not make this a full screen background, right? So if I filled the background with what I honestly did is opened up Photoshop and I placed the photo on one side and on the other side, I just created a rectangle with the fill color and I saved that out as a JPEG file. And so initially I defined that as a background image, full screen background, because I thought that would work well. The challenge, though, is that when you're defining background images, Muse doesn't allow you to change the background fill on a per breakpoint basis. Secondly, given the way browsers work, given the way Muse works, when you, let's say you took another approach. I hope y'all are following me. I am going to break this down. But let's say you did take the approach of the background fill. My sort of second approach was go ahead and set the background fill, and then leave the background there, but place the image on top and set it as a full width image, and then create a container that's also full width. The problem I found with that is that for just a microsecond, when you load the page and go to a different breakpoint, Muse loads the background image and then it loads the page content. So I had this really annoying flash of my split pane window between the two. Let's jump in and let me show you how I did go about sort of applying that. So I'm going to jump out to my site plan and we'll go to that ticket page. All right. I have, as you probably might guess, a master page set. And the master, let's see if I can do that the right way. The master page has my navigation solved. I keep doing that wrong. So if I jump out, let's go back to the site plan for a minute and just look at how I've got my masters set. So because there's a different footer on some of the pages, I went ahead and set up my top navigation, my logo, and my text, my menu, there at the top on my main master. What you'll also notice is if we step out here, my largest breakpoint, I made it a fixed breakpoint at 1400 pixels. Part of the ask from the designer was that I use a parallax scroll effect in the largest breakpoint for the video or the image, whichever it was that we went for in that design. So I set that 1400 pixel fixed width breakpoint, and then I did a 1200 pixel, and then I jumped to tablet, basically 768. And given the design constraints of at least the navigation, once I jump to 768 tablet, I have more of hamburger menu behavior. I'm using a cookie widget here as well for the fly out push navigation of the menu from the right-hand side. So with that set up, I can jump over now to my little win tickets area. And you'll notice that I have some of those same breakpoints. I've added an additional one because the designer wanted to have a contact form on tablet that goes from two up to a single width. In the largest breakpoint, what I did to solve this, you'll notice is I set the what you'll notice is I set the browser fill to be the color that we needed. That makes any sort of background quick load be easier. It's not an inconsistent color with the design. What I did next is, I think, a good idea, but it's rather odd. I placed on the canvas actually a slideshow widget. Let's see if I really did that. Let me see here for a second. Yeah. So I went in and I placed a slideshow widget. I went to the widget directory. So in the widgets library here, under slideshows, I selected the full screen slideshow and I dragged it out on the canvas. Now I don't want a slideshow behavior. What I'm looking for from this implementation of the widget is to actually make sure that my background fill for this particular breakpoint is set to 100% height and 100% width. So if I come on in here, I can see that I've got that slideshow set, but autoplay is turned off. And if I were to show up the thumbnails, it would become apparent that I have a single image. So the slideshow has only one image that remains constant. That allowed me to basically have this be a full height and width image that's going to scale proportionately as it fills out for that particular breakpoint. I did the same thing for the 1200 pixel breakpoint. So that's where I'm getting kind of this fluid width behavior. Depending on the height of the page as the viewer looks at it, it will continue to scale to fill the shape. So if I make it tall, it's going to be tall. If, as the designer wishes, the viewer is making it a little bit more squared up, the image will always fill appropriately. And because it's scaled to fill, and I have it basically placed there to fill the entire browser, I can rest assured that this line is going to remain centered in my design. Next breakpoint, when you jump to the next instance, this is where the design changes. So what I did there, if I look at my layers panel here on the page, you'll see that I've just hidden that slideshow. So it's there, but it's hidden on that breakpoint. And inversely, I placed an image and a container, or I think I just set the background fill. So the browser fill is that pink color. And then in the header area, I created a container that I filled with the image. And I set its pinning definition to be centered so that it would scale to fill well. One of the discussion/arguments I've had with my colleagues about this site is it's geared to let Adobe salespeople teach Muse or sell Muse to customers. And it's so hard to explain what I'm doing to achieve this that it's just a long story. So I'm still hopeful y'all are following me. Let's take a look at this page just to see how that behavior all comes together. So I'm coming on in and exporting the page. I'm going to dare to look at Facebook and make sure that this is working out well real quickly here. All right, there's my page, and it is working out well. I've got 5 comments. I'm going to check the comments in just a second. But notice how this is really working pretty well. So I've got my background image here. I've got my fill. As I drag the edge of the browser, I'm getting a nice scale to fill behavior. So again, there's so many moving parts, right? There's a lot of asks that he had in this design. So one is that the navigation here on the left remained 40 pixels top and bottom from the edge of the browser. This is also 40 pixels from the edge of the browser. And I can scroll down to my footer area because I'm still working on the design. I would tighten this up a little bit and get the footer a little higher. But I could have that sort of box that he's looking for. As I continue down, again, I need to move some of this around a little bit. I get to that smaller breakpoint, and I get the behavior he was looking for there as well. So because this is a container with a background fill, I get that nice behavior that it's going to scale to fill the container no matter how wide that container is. I also have the SVG text that's scaling appropriately as I move along there. There's my side-by-side contact form. If I come a little bit further and jump to that next breakpoint, let's do it here. I've got that nice stack on top. And I've got my push menu, which is pushing everything out of the way to allow the viewer to navigate as they're working along. So pretty slick. I think that it was quite a lot of combinations of efforts to get to that place, but it's coming along. I'm starting to feel like I've solved it. One of the things I've not yet done on this page is applied that onload animation to the content of the page. Let's go to the landing page. I want to show you a little bit about how that was architected, because I'm aching to fix that, the video on the second breakpoint. And if you know that, then you're pretty right. So here I am on the landing page, and let's remind ourselves, no, let's not, we're not going to go back there till I fix it. I'm going to go to my second breakpoint and take a look at what's going on with my video here a little bit. I think this guy just moved down. Now, there's always going to be a truth about videos. I mean, videos, you don't usually crop off content on a video. So even if you set it to be fluid height and width, there's going to be some pillar box, I guess is what they call it, when the video is being made smaller. Rather than distort the video, you'll get some lines top and bottom. So I'm going to try to tighten that up and see if it helps a little bit. But I also want to kind of show you something cool. Because I have a fixed breakpoint here at 1400, I can select the video. This could be a background image, or it can be a video, and I can apply a parallax scroll effect. Now, personally, there's so much going on right here with movement that I'm not so sure it's an excellent idea, but the art director did want to have a parallax effect on the design. So what I can do is come in and select that video, go into the scroll effects panel. Now, keep in mind the reason why this is working. Let me just show you how it wouldn't work. If I jumped to the 1200 pixel instance of that video and I select the video on the canvas, that background video, so the widthy light background video, I'm told, guess what, Danny, you cannot apply a scroll effect to this object because you have a fluid breakpoint, right? So if I have a fixed breakpoint with that object selected, I can. I'm going to click on motion, and what I want to do is basically a scroll effect. So I'll set this to 0. I'm going to set the starting point at 0, and I want it to move at 0.8 times the speed of scroll. It's kind of a common parallax effect that you'll see, at least as far as how objects are moving behind the screen. So if I'm lucky, I've fixed two things. One is I defined a parallax effect to my content at the surface. The other thing I do want to mention, when you define that parallax effect, yeah, let's just see. Because, see, I'm talking to myself again. When you define a parallax effect, you are basically saying that that background image is going to move at a different speed of scroll. So in order for this effect to work well, you usually need content below it that is not having the scroll effect applied to it, that's going to overlay that background image. So what I've got is an image container. I've got a text container, or just a rectangle that has text inside of it below, that's going to move over my background video. All right, fingers crossed. I'm going to pull that on File to preview this page in the browser and render that page and sip my coffee. Pumpkin spice latte today because, you know, it's that time of year. All right, don't look because this one doesn't count. I'm going to go out to the fullest instance. And I'm going to just hit reload for a second here. All right, we still have our basics. We have that funny little pixie dust video loading in the background. We've got the staggered load of the story of Baya. Yes, I said it again. The little reviews that are here. I've got my persistent navigation. If I were to press and drag now and scroll the background, notice that I'm getting a parallax effect. So I was able to have that video move at a different speed of scroll. And that container down below is moving up into position. All right, so still kind of makes me nervous. It's a lot of action all on one page, but I'm proud because this is what he envisioned. This is what the Triumph website is showing. And I think it's hitting all the points that he was looking for. So if I click on the anchor tag here and go to that second section, I get that nice fade and load as I come in to play here and continue on with that. All right, so that's two of the pages. I want to show you the slideshow page and kind of dig into that, but I'm going to stop and see how we're doing with any questions. So if you have questions for me, please throw it into the comments of the Facebook page, or if you're on Zoom, you can put it into the Q&A. I'll take a look at that as well. So Noah is asking how do you watch this later? Personally, I don't know how anybody watches these videos on Facebook. What you want to do is you can come back to Facebook. There's a video section. I find it hard to find. You can also just search for Adobe Muse or Danny Beaumont, me. There's a YouTube channel that you can watch all of this content. So if you go to the Muse microsite, so muse.adobe.com, and you click on I'm thinking here for a minute, events, you'll notice that I'm way behind because I actually maintain this page and I have not put links for some of the more recent recordings, but I've definitely put it up on YouTube. So if you go to the past recording section and you click watch now, maybe, let's try this again. It will take you to that YouTube channel. So this is not the one that you want, but you can easily jump over to all of the recordings that are there. So there is the YouTube channel. I think Ping Danny is the handle for it. If you're trying to find it. So that's the answer to that question. John saying Flash Player is not supported on his device and he's going away. But the question is, nothing is requiring Flash for this. There is no Flash. Zoom does not require Flash. Facebook does not require Flash. Everything I'm doing is purposefully works on iOS devices and non-Flash enabled stuff. Okay, got some compliments. Thank you very much. Okay, looks like we're good in the comments section, but let me know if you got more and I will keep an eye on that. All right, we're going to keep going. Again, I think this is not going to be the most clean-cut jam session. I'm eating up a lot of time already, but I think this is important. What I'm just constantly amazed at is the way you can use Muse as a tool to build so many different things. I've struggled with this site for the last week, but I've had a really good time troubleshooting and really coming up with solutions to some of the problems that I bumped into. So let's talk about the animations a little bit. I showed you how you can use traditional Muse scroll effect on a fixed breakpoint. So I applied it here. I also mentioned that Muse themes, there are a number of other Muse widget developers that have some similar widgets. This is just one that I've experimented with, the onload animation widget. And it has a number of different variations. It reminds me a lot of PowerPoint. And I honestly feel like when we go to rework scroll effects rather than using the scroll effects panel and all of its sophistication, we should consider a similar approach to some of the work that folks like Muse Themes have done. So how it works is a little bit kludgy because you're slipping into the native Muse application. But let's say the story of Baya, I wanted that to load in a slightly delayed way and just fade in. It doesn't need to move, it just needs to fade in. When I use the Muse Themes widget, there's a couple of different steps that you go through. It's pretty straightforward once you understand it. It's a little of a backdoor for Muse. Quite often people that make widgets for Muse want to be able to basically apply certain effects to objects on the canvas. And the Muse team does not really give you what's known as div IDs or IDs to individual elements on the page. So some folks in the community figured out early on that you can put actually a graphic style onto an object and find that in the code to apply a change. It's a little odd, but basically what you'll do here is for the story of Baya, yes, I said it again, you'll notice I have a widget here. And if I zoom in on that widget a little bit, you can see the name is Graphic Style Story Title. If you go to this widget in its default state, it doesn't really have some of these attributes. What you are asked to do is give a name that means something to you. So for me, the title of the movie, whenever it comes up on a page, story title, I gave it that graphic style name, and then I could come in and choose an animation type. And this reminds me a lot of PowerPoint. I didn't want it to be too busy, so it just fades in. You'll notice as I scroll down here, there are lots of different effects that I can use. So if I scroll a little bit this way, all sorts of different animations. And you can very easily experiment with all of them. The nice part about this approach as I show it to you is once you come in and set a different widget here for each effect that you want to apply, it's very easy to apply any one of those effects to multiple objects. So story title here is set to fade. And this is where you can determine what is that animation behavior. If you remember on the Triumph website, I noticed that as I scrolled down on the page, an image became visible. If I scrolled back up on the page, it remained visible. So that would be considered animate once when in view, I would think. Another one is to animate every time. And that basically would hide the image. If I scrolled back up again, when I came down, it would show it. So it hides and shows as it comes into view rather than showing once and staying. I don't know what loop infinitely does. It's probably an easy way to do kind of an animated GIF-like behavior where it continues to loop. And then from there, you can determine certain setting attributes. I have a delay of 0.8 seconds because as you remember, the video loads and starts playing. Then the headline comes in, the name of the movie, and then the different 3 reviews come in. So what you may notice is I have the story title here, story reviews. I've gone in and created a different instance, a different graphic style, and a different widget that has different settings. So I think I slowed it down a little bit. I've got another one here for the text, and I call it text up because that means something to me. The text up one, basically, it's got an effect called fade in up. So it kind of comes up from the bottom and sort of bumps for a second and stays, right? All different interactivities that we're starting to see a lot on the web that I believe are using some pretty straightforward JavaScript, I believe, is the approach that they're using to apply these animations. Now, here's kind of the way you tie these pieces together. I've got something called Story Light, and I named it that in the widget. If I called this potato chip, basically, the view here would show me that name, potato chip. It's reflecting what I've typed in here, Story Light, or Story Title. The other kind of handshake part about this is that I then need to go to the object that I want to apply this particular animation to and give it a graphic style of the same name. It's the one like fundamental religion. So the way you can do it really safely is come on in here, select this content and copy it to the clipboard. And then what you want to do is pretty much select nothing on the canvas. I want a very clean graphic style, but I can come in and create a graphic style. So personally, a way to do a clean graphic style, and let me explain that for a moment. If you have a background fill, if you have a stroke, if you have anything about an object that is using what we consider graphic styles, that'll be saved with the style, which you may or may not want to have happen. I'm going to come over here and just draw a plain old rectangle on the canvas and come into the graphic style. So I know it's a pretty empty bucket. And I'll create a new graphic style and I would give it a name. And what I would do to be safe is I would paste in that name story title. And you can see it actually has a whole lot of nothing going on. There are no real graphic styles being used. This is just a backdoor for me to be able to associate that widget with that object on the canvas. I'm going to hit cancel because I don't really want to create that because I've already done it. And you'll notice that if I click on the story of Baya, I can see story title is applied. So it's really pretty much that easy. And I do think combining these with some of the native scroll effects, multiple breakpoints, things of that sort, works pretty seamlessly as you go along. So I've gone in and applied that fade up effect to the text on the page. I've got nothing going on here, but I think, again, I applied that same fade up text. All right, it looks like I've got maybe a question. I'm going to jump in and take a look at it. So Susanna's saying, I can't recall if SVG is seen in search engines. I think the answer is yes, because it's not an image. The trick you want to do, let's say the story of Baya, which is actually true. It's not a true story, but in this particular instance, let me rephrase that. What I've done is, as I mentioned, I created the story of Baya in Illustrator for 2 reasons. One is you can see it's an artistic representation of a font. So this is not a real typeface, it's the logo. So it's kind of appropriate that it's drawn in Illustrator. It could just as easily have been plain old normal text. And I would draw that in Illustrator and save it out as outlines in order to kind of have a backdoor approach to creating text in Muse that scales as the width of the browser resizes. So I can easily do that in Illustrator. I type the words out, convert it to outline, copy it to the clipboard, paste it here in Muse. It's pretty good. The downside for that, though, is for things like SEO and screen readers. I am at a disadvantage because the words, the story of Baya, will not be part of that artwork, right? It's become art and not text any longer. What you want to do to take care of that is select the object. And I think if I right click here, let me just see. As a backdoor, you come in under the hyperlinks drop down and you can add, I'm kind of losing myself here, add a tooltip or an alt tag to the object. So what that does is it actually puts alternate text or an alt tag on a placed SVG object so that when a screen reader, someone who's visually impaired, rolls over it, that tooltip will be something that can be read. And search engines also pick up that word. So I would type the words here, the story of Baya, so that I know that it'll be included in the code. So that overcomes the limit of having created an SVG rather than text when you're using it in the design. Okay, how can you share websites to be displayed to a client if you're done with making the website for them? So let's just talk real quickly. We're kind of to the end of this hour. As I mentioned, I'm going to take a break. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to be at Adobe Max. I'm teaching a full day training on Adobe Muse as part of the pre-conference. We have a number of Muse sessions. So I'm going to cross my fingers, think happy thoughts, and go to Las Vegas for a week. But the question is, how do you share this as you're working? Muse gives you a lot of different ways to share content. So one way is to see it on the design canvas. As you know, when I move objects and do things, it's all good. If I want to see what I've done so far, I'm not really ready to share it with anyone. You've seen it a little bit today. I can pull down under File, and I can preview just the page I'm working on the browser. Muse will render HTML, CSS, JavaScript in the browser. It's all good. If I want to look at the whole site and click between pages and check my interactivity, I'll select Preview Site in browser. Renders everything right there in my browser using something known as localhost. So it's talking to my browser on my machine, but it's secure. No one else can get to that. It's not really in the public web. When I'm done, though, and I want to share it with other people, I can create a free trial on Adobe's hosting platform, something known as Adobe Business Catalyst. And to do that, in the Publish area here, there's a drop-down, and the drop-down allows me to select Business Catalyst as a destination. That will create a temporary site. It's only temporary. It'll be there for a long, long time. I don't think we expire those sites, but they're part of the subdomain of Business Catalyst. So I think I started out that way with this, the story of Baya.businesscatalyst.com, and I published that trial. To answer Christian Williams's question, you would do that, basically create a trial, and then you'll notice there's a share button just for easy access. You would be able to come in and grab the URL of that trial on Business Catalyst, or when you're done publishing, the browser opens up and you can see that. You can copy that URL and share it with other people. It's on the public web. What I've done is actually gone in and I went to GoDaddy and I bought a domain. And in my Business Catalyst interface, I upgraded that to a paid real site. I can really host on Business Catalyst if I pay for a monthly hosting fee, and I'm pointing my domain to the live site. So that's all good. The last way you can work is, let's say you have third-party hosting. Let's say you already host with Bluehost or GoDaddy in my case. I can also, in this publish area here, select FTP host. And that's what I've done. I think I've got this on Business Catalyst. But if I wanted to host on GoDaddy, I can come in and enter all my FTP attributes and publish it that way. The last thing is maybe you use this just to interact with clients, get their sign off on the design, and then you do hand it to a team of engineers that codes up a much more complex example of the design that you've been prototyping using Muse. You can, instead of publishing it to an FTP server, you can publish to a folder. And in that HTML folder, or in that folder, you will have all of the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. If that coder wants to understand what types of type styles you've created, there's a CSS file, a global CSS that has lots of the attributes that are there. We also create something known as a manifest, which keeps an eye on all the changes that you've made, and something for search engines called a sitemap that allows crawlers like Google to understand anytime you update the site which pages have been updated. The search engine knows to look at that site map to determine what's new about the site. All right, this is an incredibly deep dive into some pretty complex concepts. I'd love to get feedback. If this was useful to you, if you lost me for half of the conversation, I wouldn't be surprised. But when I do these sessions, if I just go from file new and do something simple, I think it's really hard to get into some of these deeper scenarios with sites that you'll see on things like Site of the Day. So I had fun with it. I have to keep working on this because my deadline's coming and I'm not done. But I think it's a great thing to share. If there are other approaches that you've thought of for things like the background scroll or the side-by-side layout that changes, let me know. I was surprised. I don't know if we just haven't gotten around to it, but I was surprised that you can't change the browser fill per breakpoint. I don't know if that's a limitation of the web and the DOM, the document object model structure, or if it's a Muse limitation. I'd have to actually check with engineering, but I thought I had a pretty good workaround. Ollie Pordelli from cookie.com has joined us. Ollie, I got a bunch of your widgets going public, so you may get some feedback on that, along with some widgets from the Muse theme folks. So thanks everybody for your time. I will be back here in 4 weeks, fresh from Max. If you have topics you'd like to see covered, throw it into the comments area here on Facebook, or you can send me an email. I'm Danny@adobe.com. I don't always get to every single email that I get as quickly as I'd like, but I definitely appreciate the feedback. Susanna asked if the onload animator was only for fixed breakpoints. No, not at all. It's fixed and fluid. You can use it on either. So it's actually really the solution for having scroll effects on fluid breakpoints. It works. As I mentioned, it's very much like PowerPoint. There's one where you actually move to center and stop, so it animates to center and stops. As I mentioned, and I even poked Ollie about this, I don't think there's a lot of ways that you can say center in the browser no matter the height of the browser, but just being able to move to center and stop, I thought was pretty terrific, and that's one of the effects you can go with. Thank you, everybody. Catch you in 4 weeks, and send us your designs to the Site of the Day. I'm going to end with that because submissions have gotten a little light, and it's awfully nice to see the work that you do. So I'm going to come on in here. If you go to muse.adobe.com and you jump over to Site of the Day, do me a favor, even if you don't think we're going to pick it, send me the work that you're doing. So select Submit Your Site and send us what you've got. If we do pick you, you get such an incredible amount of traffic to your site. It's not even funny. I did a site for my wedding 2 years ago. I still get over 100 hits a day to the site. So I blame a lot of that on it being showcased on Site of the Day. Thank you, everyone. We will see you again soon.